Today, I want to talk to you about how osmosis affects our food. Primarily, I want to talk about how food spoils. So in the air, there are microscopic spores of bacteria and fungi floating around. And these single-cell spores do not bother us or affect us until they grow much larger into a larger colony. And the same goes for our food. If you leave out bread, what's going to happen is these microscopic spores will land on our bread and then grow into a colony of fungi which destroyed our bread. The same goes for most our foods. They go bad when bacteria or fungi grow on them. And so osmosis is one of the ways that either encourages or discourages bacteria and fungi growth. Let's talk about what humans used to do before refrigerators. Meat spoils really fast. It's because bacteria loves to eat meat. Meat has all kinds of nutrition in it, and so all these little microscopic things floating around the air love to grow and spoil meat. And so what we used to do before refrigerators was cover the meat in salt. If you salt the meat, what you're going to do is create an environment that is more hypertonic compared to the hypotonic bacteria or fungi in that situation. I'll explain in a minute. So by salting the meat, you're going to preserve the meat longer because it won't allow for things like bacteria and fungi to grow on it. So if you remember osmosis, it's when water goes from an area of high concentration to low concentration. And so by salting meat, what you're doing is creating an environment that has more solutes, less water compared to the inside of bacteria and fungi. So let's say a little single cell bacteria lands on that meat. It lands on the salt. The water inside that bacteria is going to want to go from an area of high concentration to low concentration. So that water will get sucked out of the bacteria, essentially killing the bacteria. The same thing with fungus. This is why in humid or wet conditions, you have things that spoil much faster or grow mold much faster. It's because having wet conditions allows the mold to grow on an environment without having to worry about it being hypertonic compared to its internal pressure. So let's think about beef jerky. Why do we do that? Well, if you take all the water out of meat and salt it, then mold and bacteria don't stand a chance. We made meat so hypertonic compared to the mold that they don't have a chance of growing on it. So why do we put things in the refrigerator? Well, most of our food already has mold spores on it because it's in the air, and that mold will try and grow on your food. But the colder the environment, the slower the mold grows. And so if it's left out in a warm environment, that mold will grow much quicker. But if you put it in a refrigerator where it's much cooler, the mold is going to grow slowly. And so we want to keep our food cool so that way it will not spoil. If you freeze your food, that kills all of the mold and all of the spores, and then you don't get any spoiling or any growth in that way. Let's talk about fruit. Fruit generally has a lot of water in it, which is why fruit can get moldy so quickly. If you keep fruit in your kitchen, it does not take long for it to spoil. What humans figured out was if we want to keep our fruit for a longer period of time, we can turn it into preserves or what we call jelly or jam. And the reason that doesn't spoil as fast is because of osmosis. So when you make jam or jelly, what happens is there's such a high concentration of sugar, which in this case will be the solutes. There's such a high concentration of sugar inside that jelly that when a mold spore lands on top of that jelly, the jelly is more hypertonic compared to the internal cell of that mold. And what happens is the mold will lose its water due to osmosis to that hypertonic jelly. By having a very sugary concentration, what you're doing is making an environment that makes it very difficult for mold to grow on. If there was more water inside that jelly, then yes, the mold would be able to do it. This is why some of us have had the same jar of jelly for a year. It's because it is so hypertonic compared to mold spores or bacteria spores or even fungi spores. So when they land on that jelly due to osmosis, they will lose their water, shriveling up and dying. The same is true for honey. I have had the same jar of honey in my cabinet for 3 years. It is fine. I do not have to refrigerate honey. I do not have to worry about honey spoiling. It's because anything that lands on honey, the honey is so hypertonic that it just sucks the water right out of the mold and that mold dies. So it does not get a chance to grow and actually destroy the honey. So let me ask you, are there things in our refrigerator that don't necessarily have to be in our refrigerator? I'll give you an example. Pancake syrup. Does pancake syrup have to be in the refrigerator once we open it? Well, pancake syrup is so sugary. It has so much solutes that it is more hypertonic compared to any of the bacteria or mold that will land on it. And so just like honey, most pancake syrups are not going to spoil being left out because that mold will land on it and it will not be able to grow because of how hypertonic the honey is compared to the mold.